So first, let's just lay out what are those new rules that were established by the Board of Commissioners given the COVID-19 crisis we're dealing with right now.
So I think before you even lay out the rules, you have to understand the powers of the government and the power of Columbia County. There's been a lot of speculation that Columbia County is not doing enough and that Columbia County doesn't care, and that couldn't be further from the truth. We are working extremely hard to try to make sure that we do everything we can for the well-being of our citizens in Columbia County. First and foremost, I think you need to understand the power of county government. Counties are political subdivisions of the state. We get our power from the state. Cities have charters, and a lot of times in charters, they will give the mayor specific power. The county does not give Chairman Duncan the law doesn't give Chairman Duncan any specific power. It's certainly not in a situation like this to issue an executive order to make something happen. So first and foremost, you have to understand how the rules are made. And in a county, the rules are made by the entire Board of Commissioners. And we have a Georgia law that allows us to establish certain rules in times of emergencies. So taking that law into, make it part of our understanding what we can and can't do, we have the Board of Commissioners has come up with a rule that basically mirrors what the governor has done for the state. And that rule says that if you have 10 or more people gathered at a business, they must stay 6 feet apart. There's a lot of misconception out there about you can't have more than 10 people in a business. That's not what our rule says. It's not what the governor's order said. The governor's order said that you can have more than 10 people gathered if you take steps to keep them 6 feet apart. So what Columbia County has done is we have established those guidelines and those steps, and we're trying to enforce those by using our code enforcement to go out if there are places that 10 or more people are gathered and they're not 6 feet apart, then we're following up on those complaints and trying to make sure that we establish that social distancing.
So when code enforcement goes there, if they do find that a business is in non-compliance with these new rules, what happens to that business?
So at that point, they'll be given a notice of violation that they are in violation of a rule, and it's a little different than an ordinance because there's no really clear law that says, okay, you can drag these people to court. But what we do have on our side, especially in the case of a restaurant, for example, if the restaurant has an alcohol license, the Board of Commissioners has the ability to pull that alcohol license if they find them violating rules in general. So we think in this case that we could actually pull somebody's alcohol license, or we could actually pull their business license if they're not following the rules. But fortunately for us, almost all of the businesses that we've been to, we found in compliance to begin with, and those that were out of compliance really didn't understand the rule, and now that it's been explained to them, they have gotten into compliance.
So for the example of restaurants, if you have someone dining in and you have a server that's repeatedly coming and giving you your drink, your menu, your food, how are they able still to keep that 6 feet? That seems like it would be pretty tough to do.
Yep. So it is, and if you think about that and you put it into context, these rules only apply to these what we would consider non-essential businesses. So for example, you gave the example of a restaurant, okay? I'll answer the question, but if you look at it on the other side, if you're in an essential business such as a grocery store or a gas station, how can you conduct your transaction with a clerk in less than 6 feet? You can't. You have to hand them money. They have to hand you money, right? So hopefully you're being responsible by washing your hands, by making sure that you're doing everything you can do to keep that distance to the best of your ability. Servers in restaurants are being required to do the same thing. What the restaurants are doing that are open, that have a dining room open, what we've seen is they're seating people every other booth or every other table. They've taken half of the chairs out of the restaurant, or they've taken half of the tables out of a certain area so they can spread everything out a lot more. The interaction with the server is going to violate the 6 foot rule for a few seconds, less than a minute. But again, if you go in your daycare or you go into your doctor's office, the same thing's gonna apply. I had a doctor's appointment this morning, the same situation where I checked in and then was asked to wait outside because they didn't want people congregating in their lobby. But then when I actually went in, I was in close contact with my doctor, with the assistant, with the therapist afterwards, with the person that took my money. So there's no way to say we're all going to stay 6 feet away from each other all the time.
These businesses are getting a lot of flack from people. However, there is a personal individual component as well. The business stays open. You as the individual have the decision whether you're going to go there, dine in, or not.
Right.
Do you have a message to people in Columbia County, the citizens, on how they can responsibly support local business and how their actions make a difference?
Yeah, I think that's huge, to be able to say that people need to be socially responsible. And if you are sick, or if you have a loved one that's sick, or if you are at a high risk, and we've all seen the things that make us at high risk, then you need to stay away from all these businesses. You don't need to go in there. You need to stay out of it. If there's not something that you need or not some reason for you to go, then I would even encourage you then to stay out of it. There's a fine line in government between enforcing the rules and government overreach. I think the last thing people want is for government to come in and say, you are restricted to your home. You can't leave your home, and if you do, you'll be arrested. That is not the country that we live in. And I understand in times of a pandemic that you have to have certain rules in place. But again, we are Americans, and we are free, and we ought to be able to make decisions for ourselves. That being said, you have to make good, smart decisions. We need to be in this together. I need to be responsible to you. You need to be responsible to me. And every citizen in Columbia County needs to do that with all these businesses. It's a personal decision that they have to make.
For y'all's code enforcement officers, have they had to respond? I asked for the numbers. Do you have the numbers?
Yep.
Do you know how many businesses they've responded to?
Yeah, so it's a little over 40.
Was that what you guys were expecting, more or less, about on par?
It's really hard to say, because we are taking every complaint that comes in. If a citizen sees something, we want to hear about it. We take those very seriously. We log them into 311, and then we keep up with that complaint the entire time until it's actually closed. So we can go back and look at them and say, okay, do we have repeat offenders, or what's the case here? So it's kind of tough to gauge how many we're going to get. Hopefully citizens are at home. They're not really out seeing these things. It's kind of interesting. A lot of times we're seeing somebody committing a violation to report a violation, which makes it extremely interesting. But, we're still going to follow up on that. Right. To make sure that the businesses are doing what the rules say. So it's probably on par with what we thought we would get. Some days they're extremely busy. Some days we get very few calls.
So 311 is the number that citizens should call if they'd like to make one of these complaints.
In Columbia County, 311 is the number to call to make a complaint. If you see something that somebody is violating the rule that Columbia County has put into place, which is the only thing we can really enforce, is what the rule that the commission has put in place, which says, again, to be clear, that if you have more than 10 people, though, in a certain establishment, they must maintain the 6 foot distance rule. And if somebody sees somebody violating that in Columbia County, call 311 and we'll follow up on it. We'll investigate it. And if the businesses don't comply, which, by the way, many of them have, when they find out what the rule is and we've given them a notice of violation or we've given them a warning, they've taken very severe actions to be able to turn it around and say, okay, now we understand and we can comply.
Moving forward, it's really hard to predict. He's over in Richmond County, but I just had a business owner friend call me and say, the president just extended the social distancing recommendation to April 30th. Do you think that all these rules are going to be then extended to April 30th? And when something like that comes from the federal government, I think it's natural for people in their local municipalities to wonder, what does that mean for us? Right. Is there, again, I know it's hard to predict, but do you guys see that rule that you just laid out? Do you see it getting stricter? Do you see it getting more lenient in the coming days, weeks, months?
I think what we have to do is it has to be fluid. And you're seeing the federal government making decisions on almost a daily basis, and they're changing the way they're approaching things. I saw a press conference where the president said we're all going to be back to work and back to business by Easter. And then we had to change that, right? Because it's fluid and we had to make some changes there. And now it's April 30th. I think for Columbia County, you'll see the same thing. For the state of Georgia, you'll see the same thing. We'll have to be fluid with our rules. But one thing that's very important to note is the president's extension of social distancing to April the 30th is not a rule. It's a guideline. If it were a rule, or if it were an executive order from the President of the United States or an executive order from the governor of the state of Georgia, then that would have to be enforced at the local level. but it's not. We've only gotten guidelines from the federal government. We've gotten guidelines from the state government, and local government has been tasked with making the decision of what you can and can't do. And for us in Columbia County, unfortunately, being an unincorporated county that doesn't have a charter giving a mayor executive powers, we have to follow the state law, which is implementing the rules that we've implemented and then trying to enforce them the best we can. But again, there are guidelines at every level until you get to the local level. Then they become a rule, and then we have to enforce them. And yeah, we'll be fluid with those rules. If they need to get stricter, we'll make them stricter. If they need to be relaxed in some way, we'll try to relax them in some way.
I know you've already touched on this, but this is my last question.
Sure.
Y'all have gotten a ton of criticism from people saying, like what you said, Columbia County doesn't care, Columbia County's not being strict enough, this is why government needs to get involved to prevent this from happening. Again, what do you say to people who are very critical about the way that Columbia County has been handling business in this unprecedented crisis?
I think you need to go back and look at history and to see the way Columbia County has taken care of its citizens in the past. We've always gone to extraordinary measures to make sure that the quality of life in Columbia County is the best that it can be. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. It's not just the building a park. It is businesses and having access to certain things. There's been a lot of criticism about, the commission only cares about business and deep pockets and those sort of things. But how do you explain that to the single mom who's working at a business who gets shut down by the government, who works in what's considered non-essential by this government but not non-essential by the federal government, and we basically say you can't work for the next 2 weeks, the next 3 weeks, the next 60 days? How do you explain that to that family that they have absolutely no money coming in? There may be some stimulus check coming from the government at some point, but between now and then, if you were living paycheck to paycheck, you're just out of business. I think the socially responsible thing to do, and what we've tried to do with the quality of life in Columbia County, is to say this is a very serious thing that's going on right now. It's a crisis. We've implemented rules. We've implemented rules at the county level to keep people apart. We've closed our offices because we think that's a socially responsible thing to do. Mm-hmm. And we want every other business to take those considerations into account as well. And then they need to decide what's best for their business. If there's a way they can continue business and be socially responsible and continue to put food on the table for their family, then they should. If they can't be socially responsible and they have to do it, if they're in a business where they just absolutely have to break the rules, then that's very unfortunate. I hate that. And I know the commission hates that. But, government's been put in especially local government's been put in a very precarious situation in that we're not getting a lot of guidance from the federal level and the state level. It's basically been told, just do whatever you want to do at the local level. Well, we've chosen in Columbia County to work with our citizens, not to make decisions for them. And that's probably the bottom line for us.
Perfect. That's all I needed. Do you have a two-shot or do you get one?